everyone, today we're going to take you through the process of applying the semi-transparent blonde finish. It's on an open grain ash body, so we're going to take you through the process of grain filling first. If you have a closed grain wood like alder or basswood or maple, you can skip the grain filling steps and move right on to your base coats. This is a semi-transparent finish, so the only difference between this and a solid color is that with this you're going to spray your color coats until you've kind of reached the depth of transparency that you're after, where a solid color, you basically want to spray your color coats until it's completely opaque. Other than that, the finishing schedule is exactly the same. So yeah, we'll move on with this and hope you enjoy. This T-style body is swamp ash, and for what we're doing, we'll be grain filling it. We're going to be doing like a transparent blonde finish on it. So although sometimes, you know, those older examples, you see it kind of sinking into the grain and whatever, we're still going to be doing kind of a natural oil-based grain filler on it, which will fill in most of those pores and kind of just give it a bit of a flatter finish look. You know, we always promote safety with this stuff. So even though this isn't lacquer, it's oil-based grain filler, you know, there are still fumes. So we always recommend wearing a mask. I've got a little bit more of a deluxe setup, but you know, you can go get an organic vapor rated respirator. You can get them on Amazon for $40 or your local hardware store. Pretty, you know, cheap to get. It's definitely something you want to invest in. You know, health is important. So also I recommend just getting some nitrile gloves, making sure all that stuff stays off your skin. And even once you're all finished with your project for the day, I generally recommend changing clothes. You know, the vapors, they just stick to your clothing. A lot of times I've noticed, you know, you take your mask off and go on with your day, but you know, you're still breathing that stuff in because it sticks to your clothing. So I usually like to wear a mask, kind of gloves, cover up as much as possible, and then just change everything after and kind of, you know, be safe and get on with your day. So we're going to mix up this oil-based grain filler now. It's a really heavy solids content. So even if it, you know, has only been sitting on the shelf for a couple of days, it usually settles out and separates. So we're going to take a couple minutes to stir it in thoroughly. It's in a paste form. It's about the consistency of peanut butter, but if you want it even thinner than that, you know, you can dilute it with a little bit of mineral spirits. Just start off really light because it does dilute very quickly. And from there, we're just going to kind of massage it into the pores, and then we're going to squeegee it off. And we're going to go perpendicular with the grain. We're going to let it dry for a little while after, and then we're going to kind of buff off the last little bit. And then from there, we'll let it sit for 24 hours before we do any kind of sealing on it from there. I should have mentioned earlier that when we prepped this body for grain filler and ultimately sealer, we had sanded the entire surface with 320 grit sandpaper. Remember, you always want to sand with the grain. So basically we're gonna mix this up for a minute or so, and then once it's kind of a nice consistency, we're gonna apply it. And then we're going to wait for the solvents to flash off for about maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And it's going to go from kind of a shiny look to a dull look. And that's kind of your sign that you can start squeegeeing the excess off. And then by the time you've kind of got that worked off, you can kind of buff off the last little bit of the surface residue with a coarse cloth. Or I find like some of the higher like end paper towels work good just because they're pretty thick and coarse. You know, sometimes people use almost like a burlap cloth and that works well. But I mean, if you don't have anything like that, some of the better paper towels work well. Okay, so that's a good consistency. It's almost kind of like a peanut butter. Some people use like a coarse paintbrush to apply this, which is fine. I think it's faster and just, I don't know. I've just always applied it by hand. So usually I'll put on 2 sets of gloves. That way, once everything's applied and you're going on to squeegeeing, you don't have to worry about kind of getting it all over your arms and whatever. You can just take off the second pair and you got a nice clean pair underneath. So I'm just going to take out some, and I'm just working it into the pores. We're just going to cover the whole surface. It'll take you a few minutes. Just take your time and massage it in everywhere. Now once this dries, you know, overnight at least, sometimes, you know, you might want to wait like a full 24 hours. We're going to lightly sand it with like a 600 grit. We don't want to do too coarse because we don't want to take out what we just put in there. We don't want to pull it back out. And if you've got a piece of wood with really deep pores, you might even do a second application of this. If you want a really pristine looking kind of metallic finish, you kind of want those undercoats to be as consistent and, you know, nice even surface. So sometimes if you see that it's kind of shrinking into the pores a bit, you may want to do a second coat after you've done the first coat. Let it sit for 24 hours, sand it, and then see where you're at. We've got the ferrule holes here. You know, you can plug those with different pieces if you want. Often I just do my thing and kind of clean them out after the fact, you know, with a little flathead screwdriver or something. These 8-ounce cans, we don't fill all the way to the top. We supply about 9 to 10 ounces, like weight, not fluid ounces, you know, weight ounces. And that gives you a little bit of space and room in there to be able to stir it without having everything splash out the top and hit the collar of the can. And realistically, one of these cans is usually enough to do, you know, 2 bodies. So while this side dries, you can move on and do the other sides if you want. I like to do just one side at a time. Just kind of keeps your mess contained a little bit. So we're just doing a last kind of look on everything here to make sure everything's kind of filled in and covered. We're making sure that there's not any exposed dry wood on here. We're going to get those sides after the fact. Everything looks pretty good. Now, you can see some of these higher areas where there's more grain filler. It's still really shiny. And that just means that a lot of the solvents, the oils, they're still in there. So that means that we have to just give this a few minutes to dry before we start kind of squeegeeing it off. So this looks good. I'm just going to give this a couple minutes to dry now. Okay, so our grain fillers had about 15 minutes to start flashing off now. So you don't see any kind of shiny areas within kind of the excess on here. So that means it's ready to start being removed. So we're just going to use a small scraper. Some people use a credit card or even a Stanley razor, but you know, you have to be a little bit more careful with that so you're not gouging your guitars. I find that these little plastic ones work quite well, and it's just a good size for most. Again, some things will fall into your cavities if you haven't already kind of filled those up with something to block it, and it's fine. They can be cleaned out after the fact. So we're going to go perpendicular with the grain. We're going to try to get off as much as possible, but we also don't want to dig out too much. We don't want to try to pull it out. And then after that, we're basically just going to use like a coarser towel to kind of buff off any of the excess that's on the surface. It's a good idea just to have a good stack of paper towels handy. because you're basically just cleaning off your scraper after each round. And you can already see the surface is just like really nice and level. You don't see all the pinhole kind of pores peeking through. So that means that this is, we did a good job filling this so far. Now, if you're going to do a couple guitars back to back, you can reuse all this excess that you're pulling off. A lot of people put it right back into the can. And, you know, some of that solvent blend is already flashed off, but you can just add a little bit of mineral spirits to it, redissolve it, and it's completely ready to use again. So this looks really good. I'll just do a quick once over on it again. Now, like I said, you can kind of do all four, or all the sides before you do this. However, I guess you can't do all of them because the one on the bottom, you know, it's going to be face down. So you could do the sides of this before you start scraping. I usually just like to do one side at a time, you know. Do the back or the front, then do the other side, and then do the sides. Seems like our first kind of go around got a lot of it off, so we're doing a good job here. Now we're just going to take a coarse cloth. Like I said, these, you know, Bounty wipes work really well just because there's a little bit more meat to them. And we're just going to lightly kind of buff this off, any of the excess. So we don't want any of the stuff on the surface to remain there, because once we have to sand it tomorrow, we're just going to have to do that much more work. So if you can kind of just remove any of the excess right now, it's just less work tomorrow. You can see there's not a lot to remove, but you can kind of see in the light the areas that are clean versus the area that still has some residue on it. So I'll be doing the other sides after the fact, and then we're just going to let this dry for 24 hours. We'll see if it's sunken into the grain much or if it's remained completely flat. And if it's remained completely flat, then we can move on to sanding sealer coats tomorrow. Okay, so yesterday we put grain filler on this swamp ash telly body. Today we're going to be just block sanding at level before we move on to sanding sealer. You can use like a foam sanding block. I like these ones where it kind of, you have a piece of sanding paper and it kind of clips in. That way you can just kind of hold on to the handle and you don't have to worry about kind of keeping the paper nicely aligned with it. Just works really good for your flat surfaces. And then I just have a small piece cut off just for doing the edges and the cutaways. When we're sanding this, we always want to sand with the grain so that we're not creating any scratches going perpendicular to it. And we don't want to go too deep. We don't want to pull out the grain filler that we just applied. We just want to make it nice and smooth, consistent, and any grain filler that kind of is residual from when we kind of buffed it off with the paper towels, we just want to make sure that that's all taken off. This looks good, so now we can move on to spraying our 3 coats of sanding sealer, and then we'll let that dry overnight, and then we'll wet sand that. We're showing 1 full coat being applied here. In this series, anytime we refer to a coat being applied, this is made up of 3 passes. So you might notice in this clip we spray each surface 3 times, but that's really just making up 1 full coat. For our sanding sealer, we sprayed a total of 3 coats over the course of this afternoon, and we spaced them each about 40 minutes apart. Okay, so we're gonna keep working on our Telecaster body here. So yesterday we applied 3 coats of sanding sealer on this. Today we're gonna wet sand it. I'm using 400 grit sandpaper. You might wanna consider using 600 grit if you're new to the process, just less chance of sanding through. Anytime you're sanding on something like close to the edges or contours, it's just break angles have less lacquer built up there. So you never want to actually sand a corner. You just want to kind of sand up to it. If you do end up sanding through, just make sure that when you do your color coats, you give that area kind of just an extra quick pass with sanding sealer again, just to make sure that you're not spraying color over bare wood. Again, always wear a respirator. I like the ones with the full face mask just because, you know, less chance of anything splashing up in your eyes as well. But you can get a half mask one for, you know, $40 online. So always wear a respirator, and gloves help also. Again, I'm using mineral spirits today, which I like because unlike water, if it hits area bare wood, it won't swell the wood. And yeah, just pretty easy to clean up. So we'll start off Okay, so the key to this step is to ensure that everything is sanded level. The sanding sealer dries with a good amount of gloss on the surface, and once the sandpaper hits the area, it removes the shine and takes on kind of a matte look. So as we sand an area, we're looking to make sure that everything becomes matte in appearance, and that will inevitably mean that the sandpaper has made contact with each area and left us with a completely level surface. It's not uncommon to sand an area, wipe away the mineral spirits, and see that it's still kind of flecked with shiny spots. That just means that a little bit more sanding is needed for that area, so give it a little bit more attention, and just remember to check your work often to reduce the chance of sand throughs. Quite good. Now I've got a separate piece kind of torn off here, just for the sides. It's actually kind of small. I'll probably cut a little bit of a bigger one here. You just want something that you can easily grasp while you do all the sides and the cutaways here. Now something like the bottom, the base, it's almost always one of the main areas where you're gonna risk sanding through more than anything else. And sometimes, you know, anytime there's the end grain, you know, where you have the neck heel, those are always prone to sanding through. So just do your best not to. Check your work often, but if you do, like I said before you spray your color coats, just give it a quick shot of sanding sealer. Let it dry for an hour. Make sure you're not spraying on bare wood for your color coats. And yeah, go from there. Also, areas where you've sprayed onto the end grain, everything just goes on a lot smoother because the wood's that much denser there. So you really shouldn't have to sand as much in these areas anyway. Like that already looks good, and we were only sanding that for, you know, 20 seconds or whatever, but it's all about kind of how much pressure you're applying and what grit you're using. Check your work in the light, just make sure everything looks consistent, no shiny spots. This neck heel is a little bit tricky. I mean, you could take the bracket off if you want, if you already have one affixed to it. I like to just leave it on and just pay attention to what you're doing. Cutaways are always the funnest part of the job. They're super kind of tedious, and they take as much time as areas that are much bigger than them, but you know, you want the whole guitar to look consistent, so you got to spend the time on them. Good. We just got our last side to do, and then we'll be all set. I think our sides look good. Give everything a wipe down with a fresh cloth. It always is a good kind of show if you want to see, kind of check where you're at and check all your work, you know, wipe it down with some mineral spirits. But right now they're a little bit polluted with lacquer residue from sanding. So if I wipe down the face right now, we just have a lot of kind of white residue on here. So just use a nice dry cloth and kind of just buff it up as much as you can. Just kind of check your work, and overall this looks good. So we're gonna let this one dry. I mean, realistically, I'm probably gonna let this dry overnight, just because I don't want to spray and risk any contamination with any mineral spirits that could still be in the wood in any areas. But you could spray after an hour or two if you were certain that everything had flashed off and was nice and dry to put your lacquer on top of. So once this is ready to go, we're going to spray it with our transparent blonde lacquer, semi-transparent, and should be good. sprayed 2 full coats of blonde onto this body. For most colors, I'd say just use the can and spray 3 full coats, but we wanted to leave this finish slightly transparent. You'll see once we finish up the blonde coats, I spray a quick mist of blush remover over the body, which just allows the lacquer a little bit more time to flow out. It's definitely not necessary, but it can be useful in that the finish may dry a little bit flatter, which will reduce the amount of wet sanding that will be required. Okay, so this has had a day to dry. Yesterday we sprayed 2 coats of the transparent blonde finish on this. I didn't do a third because I still wanted to keep some of that semi-transparency on this so you can still see some of the grain coming through. Everything dried out really nice. We didn't have any runs or anything, so we don't have to worry about sanding any areas on this. And today we're going to start doing the clear coats. We're going to do 3 full aerosols of the vintage formula clear gloss. That'll give us enough build so that we don't reduce the risk of sanding through on the edges and corners. So as we're spraying this, we want to be really focused on making sure that we're hitting every area evenly, and especially on the edges. Just make sure we keep that build up. So we're going to do 3 coats today, 3 coats tomorrow, 3 coats the following day, and then 3 coats on the last day. So that should take us to 12 coats, and then we'll let it sit for about a month drying before we wet sand and buff it. Okay, so we're only showing you a portion of the clear coats that are being sprayed here. We did a total of 12 coats, basically spraying the contents of all 3 aerosols of the vintage formula clear gloss. Each coat was applied basically in the same manner as the others, 3 passes making up a single coat. And we did this over the course of 4 days, 3 coats per day with about an hour between each coat. If by chance you end up with a run in your lacquer or a small piece of debris falls into the finish while it's wet, just let it dry overnight and then come back and sand that area with something very light like 800 grit. Go very slowly, just enough to fix that area. Okay, today we're going to be wet sanding and polishing this telly body that we started a few weeks ago. So we did 13 coats of clear on this, and it's had 4 weeks to dry now. So we're going to be moving through a progression of wet sand grades. We're going to start off with 600 grit. Once everything is completely flat, we're going to progress to 800, 1000, 1200, and then 1500 grit. And it's just steadily removing all the scratches, kind of grit by grit, as we progress upwards. Our wet sand papers are soaking in mineral spirits right now. I like to use mineral spirits or naphtha because they won't swell the wood. If you use water and you don't have any cavities, or if your cavities aren't sealed up, the water can get in there and actually swell the wood. You'll see like bumps that kind of go with the grain, and it can just ruin your finish. So I've always found mineral spirits work really well. We'll wear a respirator while we're working on it, and also gloves, eye protection also is a good idea. We have a sanding block just to make sure everything's being sanded consistently. And just like always, we want to be really careful like kind of around any edges, corners, or contours, just because anytime there's a break angle, just inherently lacquer doesn't build there as much. So you just always want to be careful around the corners. Kind of the first thing that we're tackling with our 600 grit is to remove all of the shine off this. So as we sand, you'll see that it becomes matte in appearance, but you'll also see any of the lower spots will kind of remain shiny until it's flattened out and the sandpaper's had a chance to kind of rough up those areas. So we're going to check our work often until everything's completely matte or kind of satin in appearance, and then we'll progress on to the finer grades. Okay, so I just quickly hit this area with the 600 grit, and you should be able to see it already that this area is much more like it has no gloss anymore. This still has its gloss because it hasn't been sanded, and this is matte in appearance. Now there are some areas, kind of the lower spots, that you'll see these small areas of kind of specks of gloss, and that just means that those are the lower points that the sandpaper hasn't touched yet. So it just means that that area still needs to be hit with the 600 grit until it's completely matte and has a consistent look. As we're going, we just always want to check our work after every minute or two, just to make sure that we're progressing, but we also don't want to go too much and sand through anywhere. So that 600 grit has worked well. I don't really see any shiny areas yet. Sometimes the mineral spirits can take a minute to flash off even after you've wiped it. So if you're unsure, sometimes I'll just move on to the other side, and even if this is face down, it'll still kind of continue to flash off a bit, which I know doesn't make sense because it's not getting any air, but yeah, I can still see a little bit here. But I'll start on the other side for a minute and let this sit for a second. Okay, so we've finished sanding all the surfaces with 600 grit. You can see the surface, it's completely consistent. We don't kind of have any shiny spots anywhere. We're gonna progress now to 800, 1000, 1200, and then 1500 before we move on to our final polishing. We don't really need to spend as long on the other grits. You know, I'd say just make sure you hit the entire surface. I don't know, a couple minutes on each side. Just make sure it's very consistent, because basically what we're doing with 800 grit is we're removing the 600 grit scratches. So we want to make sure it's nice and consistent, but we also don't want to do too much and risk burning through any of the areas. So we'll move on to 800 now. Okay, we finished all of our wet sanding. We did it up to 1500 grit. We didn't have any sand throughs, so that's always a great thing. Some people, if they want like a satin finish, you can stop here. Some people like that kind of matte, like knockdown look where it's not glossy. We do offer a satin lacquer also, but I mean, just wet sanding up to 1500 grit gives you really that kind of same look, and also gives you the choice if you want to leave it like this, or you can polish it up to a full gloss as well. We're going to be bringing this up to a full gloss. We're going to start with a medium polish, which will take out kind of the 1500 grit scratches that are still on it. And then we've got a fine polish, which will take out the swirls and kind of real micro scratches. If you have an electric polisher like this, you can use it, but always make sure that you're really kind of going back and forth, not staying in one area for too long, because it's very easy to burn through it. Just to show everyone the process today, we're going to be doing it by hand. So I just have a cotton microfiber cloth. You just want to make sure that you have something that's very soft, so it's not going to leave any other scratches as you're working on it. And yeah, we're going to start with the medium. We'll do all surfaces, and then we'll move on to the fine. We'll want a separate cloth for both, because if you're doing a fine polish and you know, some of that medium polish kind of makes its way onto it, and you're going to be putting those medium micro scratches in it. So you always want to start off with a brand new cloth for each polish. So we're just going to apply a dollop of it, about the size of a dime, and then we're just going to start in one area, just making circles, and then just kind of work our way around. Really, it works extremely fast. You'll be able to see it shine up really quickly kind of as you're working at it. And then if you want to check your work, just get a clean part of the rag. Just clean it off. And we're already getting a gloss there. We'll keep at it. Definitely wears on your shoulder, so I mean, you can always kind of do one of the surfaces and come back to it later if you need, just so you're not giving yourself too much shoulder fatigue. But yeah, you definitely notice it when you're doing it by hand. I'll clean it and just check it real quick. So already we're getting a good gloss on it, and you can kind of compare. This is just the area that's just been worked on with a medium polish for a minute versus the area that's just been sanded at 1500 grit. So pretty big difference. So you're gonna find, just like when we were doing the wet sanding parts, the kind of the biggest pain point of all of this is when we're in the cutaways and any kind of little areas with the neck heel there. And you just want to take your time with it. You know, something like when you're doing the polishing, everything's non-toxic, so you know, you could do this, you know, while you're watching TV or something at night if you want, but you know, the more time you spend on it, the better it'll look. You don't want to have the whole thing glossy, but your cutaways are still all matte and, you know, not finished up as nice. So, you know, take your time with it. So we've polished the entire guitar with the medium polish now. We're just finishing up with the fine, and everything's looking really good. We brought out a lot, or buffed out a lot of the swirl marks. And if you're at this step and you still see a little bit of scratches underneath, just keep at it. If you find the fine polish isn't getting out the last few scratches that you're after, go back to the medium polish, and it's a little bit coarser, so you work them out and then come back to the fine. But I think you'll have good results as long as you followed all the steps that we went over today. As always, you just want to find a clean area of the cloth, kind of wipe away any residue that we have. And yeah, this is coming along well.